So it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here. You have such an incredible background. It's something that is so unique to our people. And as part of the royal family of Swaziland, you began your life in a very different way than most people that I've met personally. So can you share with us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in Israel?
Well, that is a very long story because I could give you a shortened version, and that is I was studying at university in South Africa, in Johannesburg. I'm a language major, so I studied French, German, and Italian. And one day I found myself very bored in an Italian class. And I didn't find that the lecturer was saying something so interesting. So I looked around myself to see what other people were doing. And there was someone sitting to my right who was writing backwards from right to left. And I looked at him and I looked at what he was writing. I said, that's not Italian. What is that? And after the class, I asked him, I said, tell me, what were you doing there? He said, I was doing my Hebrew homework. It was a Jewish person. So I thought, wow, if I could write like that, that would really be fancy, you know? So you have to understand the backdrop to all of this. We're talking about a time of apartheid South Africa. We're not talking about the way it is today or anything like that. In fact, one could say that there's basically no similarity in the South Africa that I know and the South Africa of today. So it's a totally different, anyway, so the reason I'm saying that is because I decided that I was going to study Hebrew.
Wow.
Just out of the blue. Little did I know that it was going to be life-changing for me. I thought it was just like another language, like I speak German too, and I speak Italian, I speak French. So I thought, well, let's add another language. So I went to the Hebrew department, and everybody who was studying Hebrew over there, they were all Jewish people. If you know something about the South African Jewish community, they're basically all Lithuanians. They came to Lithuania at the beginning of the 1900s, the end of the 1800s, 1890, 1900, something like that. So I was the first black person there. And so they said everybody should choose. The South African community, Jewish community, is very traditional, was traditional at least. In other words, even if people didn't keep Shabbos or something, they'd go to shul on a Friday night and they'd make kiddush and then do whatever they want, you know, want to do. Anyway, so I enrolled to study Hebrew. And after the first half a year, we had learned the basics of the grammar, the Hebrew grammar. And then we had what they called language laboratory sessions, where they had a native Israeli help us with pronunciation and comprehension of texts.
And this is all in the university?
Witwatersrand. WITS, it's called for short. Sorry. It's called WITS for short. And the first text that I remember I was sitting in this language laboratory with my headphones on, and all of a sudden I hear this Middle Eastern music in the background, and I sort of relax. And all of a sudden I realize that in the music there's somebody saying something. So I concentrated more, and I realized what he was saying. I heard the words, ויהי אחר הדברים האלה, והאלוקים נישא את אברהם, ויאמר אליו, אברהם, ויאמר הנני, ויאמר קח נא את בנך, את יחידך, אשר אהבת, את יצחק, ולך לך על ארץ המוריה, ועלה שם לעולה על אחד הערים אשר אומר אליך. These are lines that come up in Shacharis, just after the Korbanos, or just before the Korbanos. When I heard this, it's Akedas Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. When I heard that, there was something in me that it sounded familiar.
And you had never heard it before.
I'd never heard it.
But the first time you heard it, it felt like something.
It felt like it was telling me something very, very deep about myself. I said,
wow.
How can it be telling you something about yourself? You're not even Jewish, and at least at that time I wasn't. So I'll tell you what it felt like. It felt like I had lost my memory, and that this text that I was hearing in my ear was reviving my memory, and a memory which I didn't even know I had.
Wow.
So it was a very, very intense. It was really intense, and I felt like more like Sherlock Holmes, which is one of the books that I used to read, detective books.
Right.
I felt I was on the scent of something very, very incredible.
Wow. You know what's interesting? We run a trip that takes lots of men to Israel, many of them for the first time. And what's incredible is many times throughout the trip, a man will come to me, first time in Israel, and either at the Western Wall, the Kotel, or just when he lands in Ben Gurion, and he'll say to me, I've never been here, but it feels familiar.
Exactly. So this was my experience with the Akeda, as I was the first
wow.
Text, really. And so my journey from that point to Judaism, I call it a journey of self-discovery.
Wow.
I was coming into knowing who I was as a person, because I wasn't even Jewish. I didn't know what it meant, what the implications of my search were. But I started reading. I went to at my university. They had a collection of Hebrew books called the Landau collection, and I thought it must be something in this language that somehow moves me. And I didn't know it was necessarily something of a religious nature at that time. I just knew it had to do with this language.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked around what was in the library. There were books on agriculture, kibbutzim, geology, all kinds of books. And then I saw in one corner something, I didn't even know what it was, and I decided to look at it. It said, Mishneh Torah leHarambam,
mm-hmm.
the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam. I said, what's this? I took it out from the shelf, took it off the shelf, and I started paging through it. I said, wow, this is very interesting.
At this point, you can read it.
I just wanted to read it.
Uh-huh.
And I borrowed it from the library, and I did have some Jewish friends. I still have some Jewish friends who are, Baruch Hashem, they are all observant now. And I started sharing with them what the Rambam says, what the halacha is, and this and this and that. And my friends started getting very interested. And they started going to Torah classes that were given by the campus rabbi at the time. Rabbi Mofsin is his name. He's still in Johannesburg. He still lives there. And they started getting more and more interested. I was very happy for them because they were Jewish anyway, so they were getting interested in their own tradition. But so I followed their progression, like just from the back, just looking and seeing where it's going to take them. And then one day they invite me to their home, and what are they doing? They're putting mezuzahs on the door.
Huh.
And then the next thing, about a month later, I see a big balagan in the kitchen, and there's a rabbi there. They're kashering up their kitchen.
All from the beginning of your introduction of
right.
your work to them.
And then we used to go and watch, go and see movies on the weekend. So one time I called them on a Friday afternoon. I tell them about a very action-packed movie that's showing somewhere in town, and if they're interested in coming to see it. They said, well, it sounds very good, but we keep Shabbos, we're Shomer Shabbos now. We don't go into movies on Friday night. And I just looked at them and I was amazed. What I was extremely impressed, because my attitude has always been that if something is true, it compels the one who hears it.
Wow.
Truth is not about entertainment. Truth is about, do you really want the truth? Because the truth can actually be life-changing. And some people are quite happy with the lifestyles that they live and are not prepared to change, regardless of whether it's true or not true. But I saw with my friends, they were a living example for me, how a person, because they both came from totally secular backgrounds, how a person can turn 180 degrees because they realize that the way they've been living their life up until now, it does not go in according to what they understand the will of God to be. And
did that move you in terms of your next move?
It did indeed. It moved me because it made me understand that, well, you have to understand, because at that stage, I really didn't know. I knew I wasn't Jewish. And I was happy for them, but I didn't know what it would do for me. I didn't know what it would do for me. So I continued studying Hebrew, and then at a certain stage, I stopped and continued only with German and Italian.
Uh-huh.
And then one day, a person who was brought by the Hebrew University, Professor Moshe Sharon, he was looking through the records of students, past students, and he saw this name, and I had very high marks in Hebrew. And he said, "Who is this?" So he went around trying to find me, because he knew I was still studying at the same university. By that time, I already spoke fluent Hebrew, even before I came to Israel. So he's an Israeli, and he asked me, he said, "How come you stopped studying Hebrew?" I said, "Well, what am I going to do with the language? Even the Jews that I know, they can't speak it hardly." So,
right.
And then he popped the question. He said, "Would you perhaps be interested in studying for a PhD in Hebrew language at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem?"
Wow.
I sort of looked at him and I thought, what's he talking about? But in my readings, I had come across, I started reading on my own the weekly parshas of the week, because my Hebrew was good enough to understand what was being said. And it reminded me of Avram Avinu, when Hashem said, "Lech lecha me'artzecha, mimoladetcha, u'mibet avicha, el ha'aretz asher ar'eka." Leave your land and go to the land that I will show you. Wow. So I had a question in my head saying, well, okay, so Avram Avinu was being talked to by God. So wouldn't you expect that God, he would just tell the rest of the people around him about Hashem? What's this business of taking him away from all of that, all his surroundings, and bringing him to the land of Israel? So when this professor was speaking to me, this is what was going on in my head.
Wow.
And I said, I am also going. I am going to Israel.
Wow.
So that's how I actually got to Israel. And I realized, in other words, if I hadn't converted and studied Talmud, I'd probably be an academic by now, because that was really, I'd probably be a professor in some university. But I realized that that's not the reason why I wanted to learn Hebrew. I realized that it was actually about finding out who I am. Like Lech Lecha, the Or HaChaim HaKadosh says, why do we say lech lecha? Why don't you just say lech, go? What's lecha? So he says, because that's the only way a person can discover themselves is by following Hashem.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, what does the person know if he doesn't do that? All he knows is that I like basketball and Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and these type of people I avoid, and these type of people I like. So in the end, he knows nothing about himself or what they're about. Right. They only know, as they say in Hebrew, ta'avot, what they like and what they don't like.
Right.
And I thought, wow, how can a person live 120 years without even knowing who they are? And then Lech Lecha, I found that it was a journey of self-discovery. My whole journey to Judaism is not about being convinced of the truth of one faith over another. It was me, myself. It was about me. That's what I felt.
Was there a moment where you came here and you were studying? What was the moment where you said, I have to take it from this is an interesting exercise, an intellectual exercise, an exercise of passion and meaning. I feel something to, I have to convert to be part of this people. Was there like a moment for you when that happened?
Yes, indeed. What happened is that my friends who I knew from South Africa, they called me up while I was studying for my PhD in Hebrew. They called me up from South Africa and they told me that they were coming to study at a yeshiva in Yerushalayim called Or Sameach. And they said they wanted to see me. So I went over to see them, and I was really surprised at the way they looked, with their yarmulkes and tzitzit and all this. And they could see I was really puzzled. What's happened to these guys? And they invited me for dinner, and they said, how do you explain that a non-Jew brings Jewish people closer to their tradition? I looked at them and said, what are you talking about? They said, well, if it wasn't for you, we don't even know if we'd have become religious. We don't know if we'd have become from at all. But you introduced us to the Rambam, and it opened our whole world up. And we started going to Shiurim, and then they were studying Gemara in Yeshiva.
Wow.
So when I saw that, and they said, look, there's some classes open for anyone can come if they want to hear, about Jewish philosophy. You don't have to be Jewish to come and hear those. So I said, okay, I'll come and hear a few classes. So in I came, put on a yarmulke, sat in the back row, and all of a sudden, the rabbi started speaking. And I said, this is it. What I'd been searching for all this time. In other words, I knew there was something in the language, but I did not know what it was. All of a sudden, I made the incredible discovery that what I loved about the language was the Judaism in it. Because all that attracted me were Jewish books speaking about Judaism. That was like a sledgehammer for me. And I got a bit upset, to tell the truth, because I started speaking to Hashem, and I said, Hashem, this is not fair. If I love Judaism, why was I not born Jewish? How come I was born out of the fold? And I got so upset that I decided I was leaving Israel. And I went to, guess where? I went to Rome in Italy, a language I speak. I saw all these priests and nuns going around with their crosses and everything, And I said, yeah, Hashem, this is your fault. If I'd have been born Jewish, I wouldn't be here, And then there was some tourist instructor taking people around, showing them St. Peter's and all this type of thing. And he was talking about the Roman Empire, how they contributed to civilization. And all I was thinking about was what the Jews were going through during those periods. There were the Crusades, the Inquisition, auto da fe is Jewish people being burnt at the stake. And I started thinking about what a Jew says when he gives up his life for the sanctification of Hashem's name, Kiddush Hashem. He says Shema Yisrael. All I was thinking about over there was Shema Yisrael.
Wow.
I went back to my hotel room and I closed my eyes. I covered them over with my head and I said Shema Yisrael.
Wow.
And I started crying like a baby. And it seemed to me as if all those Jewish souls of yesteryear that had passed on with the words of Shema Yisrael on their lips were joining into my Shema Yisrael, as I was saying there in my hotel room.
Wow.
That was the moment I told myself, I am going back to Israel and I'm converted to Judaism. Because I felt if a person can run away to something which is so un-Jewish and still be looking for traces of Judaism, even in those circumstances, I knew that it would be like running away from myself, which I couldn't do.
Wow.
So
I'm sure along the way you dealt with challenge. You know, every time when people come in, they come from different backgrounds, they look different, they have different histories. How did you deal with challenge along the way? Did you feel it? And what was your approach towards dealing with the challenges that were in front of you?
Well, there are challenges and there are challenges. I felt that the surroundings that I was in were challenging for both myself and those that surrounded me, because I was really the only black person around, right? And it's true that not everyone treated me so nicely, you know, from the surrounding neighborhoods. And that, but with a history, having studied both my bachelor's and my master's in apartheid South Africa, what I felt in Israel was nothing compared to that, right? So that's a challenge on a personal level, which I found pretty difficult. But I used that energy to focus on my studies, studying Gemara, and I really got into it. And I think I always, since I was so sure that this is what Hashem wanted for me, I allowed all maybe comments that weren't so nice sometimes, I let them roll off my back. But to tell the truth, that was my only real challenge. But when I met it, it was overcome. I was bulldozing my way into Yiddishkeit. There's nothing to stop me.
Wow, that's great. What an incredible story of our people, of our Torah, and just how big the tent is, and how big Hashem wants the tent to be. And when you see something that you care about, you'll just do anything to get it. And as a result, you're better for it, and we're better for it. Thank you so much. I know that your time is limited, and it's an honor to have you on the show, and I hope we get to bring you back again. But I want to thank you for who you are, and thank you for what you've done for all of us.
Anything to encourage the Jewish people, anything to encourage them to come back to Hashem.
That's it.
I think that's one of my jobs.
Okay.
Okay, thank
you. It's an honor to meet you, and I look forward to being in touch into the future.
Thank you so much.